Hello, my name is J.D. Atkins. I'm Associate Professor of New Testament Language and Literature and the Chair of the Biblical Studies Department at Tyndale Theological Seminary in the Netherlands.
Dr. J.D. Atkins. J.D., good to see you. Welcome for your first appearance on Exegetically Speaking.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you. We're here face-to-face. You're here as a visiting scholar. How long are you here for?
A total of 2 months.
2 months. All right, fantastic. And you're working on?
I'm working on a book for Kregel from their 40 Questions series called 40 Questions on the Gospels.
That is a great series.
Yeah.
What if there are 41? What are you going to do for this 41?
Cut one.
Cut one. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. For those who don't know you, how did you get started reading Greek?
Well, like many, I started when I was in seminary in the MDiv program at Westminster Theological Seminary. I studied both Greek and Hebrew. I did really well in my courses, right? But I feel like I didn't really know Greek until I started teaching it.
It makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah. So when I was at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, working on a second master's degree, I was asked to teach some elementary Greek courses, and it was kind of feeling like I was just thrown right into the deep end. Really felt very lacking in confidence in general as I was teaching those classes, but by being thrown into the deep end, I learned to swim, and I learned Greek really well. So.
And then you used it in your PhD?
And then in my PhD program at Marquette University, I did some advanced Greek class and also advanced Hebrew class. And
knowing the languages is really critical.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to do this stuff and really dig deep into the text. Today we're going to dig deep into Luke 24, verse 41. You've got some really interesting things to say on this today. Tell me, first of all, what's going on in this passage, Luke 24, 41?
Okay, so just to give the context, Luke 24 is the story of Easter, right? And the passage begins at the very beginning with the women discovering the empty tomb and seeing an angel and all the rest. And then they go and they tell the male disciples, and the male disciples are skeptical, to say the least.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the Emmaus story where the two disciples are walking along the road and Jesus is there, but they don't recognize him. Mm-hmm. And then finally, Jesus shows up in Jerusalem, and that's the passage where we're going to be focusing on.
The disciples are all gathered.
The disciples are gathered.
Yeah.
Not just the 12, but more than that. The larger group have gathered. And Jesus shows up, and their first response is he must be a ghost. They're terrified. And this is a problem. And so Jesus says, why do doubts rise in your hearts? And then he says, touch me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see me having.
Right.
And he invites them to touch him. But then Luke tells us in verse 24, 41, he says, eti de apistunton auton.
Yes.
But while they were still disbelieving.
So even after they touched him, they or
at least they're invited to touch.
Right.
Luke doesn't actually tell us that they actually touched him or not. Right. We kind of assume that must be the case. You would expect, this is part of the picture of the story, is that they've been given various types of evidence. They've been given the empty tomb, right? They're now getting to see Jesus in person. And you think, oh, well, you got the empty tomb, you see him, that should be enough.
It should be enough.
But it's not. And then, of course, Jesus says, well, hey, touch me and see. Because, they're concerned he's a ghost. And so you would think that the response would be, oh, well, they believed and rejoiced and it's over.
Yeah, right.
But Luke says they were still disbelieving.
Yeah.
The question is, at what point do the apostles believe?
What part in the story?
At what point in the story do they actually be? And what actually convinces them?
And we should say that this podcast is actually going to continue on another podcast coming up just 1 week from now. So if you want to know the answer to that, you got to stick around and come back to know it. Yeah. But in this particular passage, what fascinates me is it says they were still disbelieving, apates charas, from joy.
From joy.
So what do you make of that? I mean, that seems like disbelief and joy don't seem to go together. One of them doesn't belong together.
Yeah. It's a very strange phrase, and commentators have really struggled to kind of figure it out. What a number of commentators have said is that you should think of this as kind of a rhetorical phrase. So in other words, they were still disbelieving from joy is kind of a rhetoric, or a modern equivalent might be something like, I can't believe it. It's too good to be true. Right? And so then the commentators take then the statement that they were still disbelieving from joy as to actually not necessarily mean that they don't take it literally, as if the apostles were actually believing, but they were just, in a sense, surprised that it was true.
Yep.
And so that's how we tend to take that phrase in the modern world, where we say, I can't, it's too good to be true. We tend to take it not literally, that rather kind of rhetorically, in the sense of, hey, I believe this in reality, but I'm just surprised that it actually was true.
Yeah. And obviously, if they're convinced of that, then there's joy. There will be joy because Jesus is back with them.
Right. And that's an excellent point, right? If that's how it works. But it's very interesting because it's apatos karos, right? Mm-hmm. So apa means from, or in this case, Luke tends to use this preposition to refer to cause. So it's not that the belief caused the joy, but
or disbelief,
but rather the joy causes the disbelief. That's quite strange.
That's very different,
right? That's quite strange, and so that's why people tend to take it rhetorically, like, well, actually they did believe, but they're just expressing their surprise at it. But what I would argue is that that's probably not what Luke meant, both from the sense of the Greek and also just the general context. Just to take a couple of things to consider. We'll come to the from joy in a minute, but first we consider the verb there for disbelief, aposteo. Okay, aposteo doesn't mean as we might think it might mean, because it's got that alpha privative at the front,
right?
And so we think, not faith, not belief. You know the etymological fallacy. We don't just base it on the makeup of the word, but how the word is used in the ancient world. And how the word is used in the ancient world is not referring to simply an absence of faith, but rather to an active refusal to believe. That's how it's normally used.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's how it's used earlier in the passage. When the apostles hear the testimony of the women about the empty tomb and the angel's announcement of the resurrection, we're told that the apostles disbelieved the women. And the word there is aposteo.
So you're taking more the idea of the refusal to believe.
Yeah, so they refused to believe the women, and we're told why. In the passage, we're told that they thought that their words seemed like leros, which is another Greek term, which means either nonsense or some sort of silly tale or something like that. Actually, some older older lexicons refer to it as humbug, right? So if you were to take it as humbug, then they're refusing to believe because it's too good to be true.
Right.
But not rhetorically, but literally too good to be true.
Too good to be true.
Then we come to the next word in Luke 24:41, or actually the word prior to it, which is eti. Now, eti is a word that means still. So they were still disbelieving, meaning that they were disbelieving or still refusing to believe in the same way, in a sense, that they had been. They had been.
Right, yeah.
Right? So
nothing had yet convinced them.
Yeah, so that eti goes back to the previous instance, most likely, of aposteo in some level, or at least from previous disbelieving that they had earlier in that little pericope where they show up, they think he's a goat. He asks, why did doubts rise in your hearts? So it's a continuation of their disbelief. And because of the eti, I find it very difficult to take the phrase they were still disbelieving from joy. It makes it very difficult for me to take it rhetorically, in the sense of they believed it, but they were just surprised.
Right.
Because again, the eti means it's continuation from what was before. So there's those pieces. Then there is, how do we take then from joy? right? How do we take that phrase? Well, Luke actually uses that exact same phrase in Acts 12:14. And Acts 12:14 is a really fun story. It's got a bit of humor in it. Peter comes after being released from prison. Or actually escaping from prison. he comes to John Mark's mother's house, and there's a servant girl named Rhoda. Peter knocks at the gate. She comes to the gate, and she recognizes Peter's voice. And then Luke tells us that she did not open the gate from joy. Apa tes karas. Right? Let me ask you a question, David.
Yeah.
Was Luke saying that in reality, Rhoda actually did open the gate?
I don't think so.
Right?
I don't think she opened the gate. I think she just got overcome.
Yeah. I mean, the whole humor of the story depends on the fact that she doesn't open the gate.
Right. And he's left outside knocking on the gate. Yeah.
So the from joy, the cause, the from joy, does not negate the fact that the gate is still closed. In the same way, apa tes karas does not negate the disbelief. We find a similar phrase. Luke likes to use apo in various ways in his narrative, but in much of his kind of changes to the old stories of Mark and whatnot, he often uses apo to refer to cause in his redaction, in the way he adjusts the story. So a sad example of this, because Rhoda is a fun example, here's a sad example, is when the disciples fall asleep while Jesus is praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we're told by Luke that they fell asleep apo tes lupes, which means from sorrow.
From sorrow, yes.
The fact that it's from sorrow doesn't mean that they were awake. They were still asleep. And so if we take these parallels, then when Luke says that they were disbelieving from joy, they're still disbelieving.
So from your reading of this text, even though they've seen Jesus and some might have even touched him, there's still this disbelief that is at the heart of what the disciples are doing there. And your project is to ask, and we're going to answer that in the next podcast to some degree, because we want them to go out and learn more about this. But you think that something lies in the next text we're going to look at that answers that question. Yeah. When did the disciples believe? All right, we'll leave it with that next time here on Exegetically Speaking. Thanks, J.D. Atkins. This ends part one of my conversation with J.D. Atkins. Part two is coming up next week. Dr. Atkins and his family were with us, resident for about a month at the Lanier Theological Library in Houston. He was researching and writing while here. Exegetically Speaking is a joint venture of Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center in Houston, Texas. Reading Greek and Hebrew, interpreting the biblical text wisely, and translating them into new languages is a calling. If you have that calling, then there's no better place than Wheaton College to answer that call. A great faculty, great students, and a great facility, just 3 reasons you should be studying there. Thanks to our Wheaton-based team who help us produce this podcast. Thanks as well to our audio editor, Kathy Capes. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.